in Spanish. And then all of a sudden I told my mom to be quiet up for a little bit because I wanted to hear this voice that was coming out of TV. And this voice was Dominique Keller. But I didn't know if it was actually her. So I keep watching the show, and then I see my friend Dominique Keller on TV. And I start texting her, and I was like, I didn't know you were a superstar. I didn't know that you were on TV now. And all of a sudden she replies to me as I'm watching the show. My mom shows up and she says, "Hey, I've been talking to you." And I say, "Sorry, you see that girl? That's my friend. I work with her with doing research with the sloths in Wisconsin." So my mom sat down and started watching the show. My mom doesn't speak English, so she was just watching it because it was my friend. And because they had really cute animals. So ever since then, I have asked Dominique to give talks to the audiences that I like. This being you guys. Dominique, let me try to make your face bigger.
Oh wow, just by you.
How do I do that, Ernie? Okay, I think I got it. Yes. Okay. So,
any chance I can see everybody else? Just quickly.
Say that again.
Can I see anyone who's
there? Right now we have. I might not be able to because of the cables.
Okay.
But
if you were, we could also add my phone and.
I can send you pictures later if that's okay with you.
Sure. Yeah. This is how many people we got.
This is a small audience today. We have 2, 4, 6, 7 people, 8 with me.
Great. That's perfect.
And another thing that we're doing, we're recording this talk, and later we'll figure out what we're gonna do with it.
Okay. Ask permission later.
But why don't you start telling us a little bit about the show? What do you do, and how you got involved? And then we'll talk about your career, your undergraduate, and all that stuff.
Well, hi everybody. So let me tell you a little bit about the show. So, Gardens in Tampa Bay, which is where I work. So Busch Gardens is a theme park, and if you didn't know, it's actually owned by SeaWorld. So our sister parks include SeaWorld Orlando, SeaWorld San Diego, SeaWorld San Antonio, and there's another Busch Gardens in Williamsburg, Virginia. But the Wildlife Doc show has been in existence, I think we're in season 6, but I'm not sure that they've shown season 6 yet. So that means that they film it, and the way they film it is they come once a month to our animal care center, which is our animal hospital at Busch Gardens. And the crew comes from LA because the production company is based out there. And what they do is they basically shadow the vets as well as the animal care staff. So that would be the keepers, the managers, the supervisors, the educators as they do their jobs throughout the day, the entire week that they're here every month. And the goal of the show is really to show the target audience, which I've been told is 5th graders and their moms. So in other words, it's not, like a high intensity reality TV show aimed at like teenagers and above. It's actually meant for younger kids. And so it's cute and fuzzy and cuddly, and really nothing bad ever happens on the show. And of course, that's not the reality of life, but those are the types of stories we present on the show. And so the main focus is usually on animal procedures that we do at the Animal Care Center and anything that goes around with that. So they might follow an animal as it comes up for an exam, but then also go back out to see what it looks like when the animal's back on the habitat, talk to its keepers and see what goes on in the daily life of that animal, kind of to give them a bigger picture. They like to try to follow a story if they can. And so that's what we do. But again, the majority of what we do is not that. And one thing I like about the show is obviously I didn't take this job as a veterinarian here to be on TV. In fact, it was sort of almost an oversight on my part. I didn't really know that they filmed the show. I don't actually watch TV, so I didn't know the show existed, but it had been filmed before I got here, which I've been here about 4 years now. So that really wasn't my goal in this job. It happens to be something that we do. But to kind of fill you in on how this fits in with what we do, when the new hospital, and the hospital's now been around 5 years at Busch Gardens, was built, they actually built it with education in mind. And so even though we're a theme park, we have this really big, beautiful animal hospital in the center of the park, and it's also part of the attraction. So when you come to Busch Gardens, you can walk into our hospital, and you'll be able to see through big floor-to-ceiling glass walls what we're doing in the treatment room, where we do the majority of our exams and surgeries, as well as our surgical suite and our clinical lab, also glass facing. So 1 out of the 4 walls in each of those main rooms is actually glass to allow the guests to be part of what we do every day. So imagine working, whether it be in your classroom or your clinic or whatever, with one of the walls being glass, and people being able to stop in and watch you doing whatever you do. It's definitely different, but I like the fact that it allows us to do some outreach. And even though we're at a theme park and not what I would consider a traditional zoo. Long answer, short question.
So far, no questions? Okay, I have a question, and I've been wanting to ask you on the text messages that we've been messaging. You guys recently had a hurricane.
Mm-hmm.
What happened to the animals? Where were you guys storing them? And what's the condition right now of the park and the zoo?
Right, so it's been probably almost 6 or 7 weeks since Irma. Hurricane Maria has been a month. Obviously, Maria didn't affect Tampa. Hurricane Irma wasn't really supposed to affect Tampa either. If you remember back in the day, we were all glued to the TV then. It was supposed to track over Miami and head over more to the East Coast. So we're on the West Coast of Florida. So we knew the hurricane was coming. We probably had a good, solid week and a half of time to prepare. And we prepared regardless of the fact that it was supposed to track more to the east of us. So the hurricane preparations included getting a vet team ready. So the vet team would be, a vet would be on what's called a ride-out team. So the ride-out team is a smaller group of people who work in the zoo area who will stay on grounds during the hurricane. They'll be in lockdown, basically, because when the hurricane passes overhead, they're not going out. So it consists of key keepers, so 1 or 2 keepers from every single area, 1 veterinarian, and then I think a couple supervisors to assist as well. Other areas of the park, like the operations people, the rides people, would have been kept separate from the zoo people. The zoo people were housed in what is our main education building, and where they were housed is also where many of the animals were housed. Any of the animals that had indoor enclosures were locked into their indoor enclosures. There were several animal groups, like our 200 plus flock of American flamingos, were moved into various habitats as best they could. They were not left outside because those animals are delicate, long-legged birds. They would not have done well, with 100 plus mile per hour winds. So birds in general, each and every bird that was in a free flight aviary or was out in the open, like the flamingos, was caught up and brought indoors into basically whatever enclosures we could find. Smaller animals that didn't have indoor enclosures that were considered sturdy enough, like our meerkats. We have a colony of 5 meerkats, and their housing mainly consists of a small burrow that they live in at night, and then a bunch of other mounds of dirt that they kind of tunnel through. Those guys were actually brought up to the hospital. So they spent the Irma time in the hospital. And that's because we have several wards there that were available. We try to keep them open for cases that need them, but in this case, everybody needed us. And so there were birds in the hospital, there were meerkats in the hospital. We had a few hospitalized patients that were already there, and so they got priority. Some of the animals, for obvious reasons, didn't come in at all. And so the center part of Busch Gardens is like a donut hole, and it's called the belt. And it's an open area where we have rhinoceros, giraffe, about 5 different types of antelope, a zebra. And so animals that have enclosures that are secure, such as the zebra, and I think, for example, in Nyala, we're actually coming in. But they don't actually have outdoor shelters that are covering them. So they were from the smaller kinds that enclosed. The giraffes were not brought in. We have 16 giraffes that roam free in what's called a south belt. And while they do have a pen that can be brought into, the thought was giraffes are pretty flighty. So if you corral 16 giraffes and all of a sudden, 80 mile per hour winds start blowing overhead, they're going to do themselves more damage trying to get out of the small enclosure than sheltering in place. And I've actually seen our adult giraffes in really heavy rainstorms, obviously not hurricane force. And what they do is they stand in the direction of the prevailing wind, and the way that the rain is coming, it rushes past them, so that they are standing in the direction that makes the most sense to them, and putting themselves as skinny as possible. There's not a lot of trees for them out there, and that's just as well, because the biggest damage we sustained was trees falling down. So they sheltered in place, and so the outcome of that was we were lucky. The storm passed a little beyond and more to the east of Tampa, so the brunt of it was actually more over Orlando than Tampa. Orlando's about 70 miles away. And even Orlando didn't get hit so badly that it was devastated. The flooding that was forecasted never actually occurred. So we were lucky there. We didn't lose a single animal during the hurricane. I think there was one flamingo that was returning back out to its flock area after that died and actually had an aneurysm. So it wasn't even directly related. It was probably indirect, maybe because of the stress of the move. And that was it. We didn't lose anything, anybody, and we didn't lose any animals. And the ride-out team made it fun. They were kept busy because they were allowed out. There was a curfew, but they were allowed out at certain times of the day after to check on animals. And we had 1,500 animals there, so they were doing their best to spot check as many as they could, taking care of the critical cases that they had prioritized first. It took really a solid week and a half to get everything in order. From the vet team's perspective, that meant ordering extra drugs to be sure, if something bad happened, that we were prepared. Getting everything labeled, sorted, and squared away, and packed up and ready for emergency use, knowing that only one of our 4 clinical veterinarians was going to be there on grounds. So if something really bad happened, he wouldn't have been able to call anybody else in, because at that point the city would have been in lockdown. So he would have just had to triage. He was lucky. Nothing bad happened. No births happened during that time, even though we had several living animals. So the day after, they were able to assess the damage, and really nothing major structurally bad happened. A lot of big trees fell down. They had that part cleaned up in 2 days. And guests were back 3 days after the hurricane.
Any questions so far? Do you think that any protocols might change? Thinking about future hurricanes, hopefully that there's none.
Yeah, hopefully there's not. Tampa typically doesn't really get hit, but we're waiting for the next big one. Yes, every time something like this happens, we do what's called a debrief. They actually did a daily debrief during Irma, and then they did one a week after Irma, and then they do one afterwards. I'm pretty sure that we're going to revise several of our vet protocols, just how we approach packing and getting things ready. And we'll probably approach things a little bit differently in how we house certain animals and have the hospital ready to take in more animals if needed.
Eddie, you had a question?
Yes, I was curious, was the zoo built with hurricanes in mind? Because I imagine you get a lot of hurricanes.
Well, actually, Tampa doesn't. The last major hurricane that did any significant damage, I think, was about 100 years ago. And that's partly because of where it's located on the Florida west coast. So we're in a bay. So Tampa itself has been really lucky. But there was a very interesting article that came out in the Washington Post this last summer predicting that Tampa is going to get that 100-year storm any day now. So it's kind of like California, the big big earthquake. I think we're waiting for it. But that's a really good question, and I think it's one of those philosophical / almost ethical questions. Are we built for it? No, the zoo is not really built with hurricanes in mind. It's built very solidly, surprisingly, and that's because we already know that we have to contain, in some cases, pretty dangerous animals. So everything is built to standards that are essentially hurricane for most things. What isn't really built to hurricane standards would be small outdoor aviaries, or even those aviaries that people walk through and feed lorikeets. Those are made of a thick zoo-grade mesh, but they're not really buildings per se. They're more, sheltered areas. So those are the kinds of things that if you're going to get the problem, it's probably going to be there. So there are parts of it that I think were unintentionally built hurricane-proof, and there are others that I think just because of what they are, would never be able to withstand a hurricane, and weren't designed to.
If you guys don't have any more questions about zoos, we can talk about how she got to be what she's doing. Right? Okay. Okay, no, before we go there.
Let me ask a question. So I always like to know who my audience is. So since we have a small group of people, who do we have out there?
Okay, Alex.
Say your majors.
I'm Alex, a CSE major.
Computer science engineering.
Yeah, okay.
Sorry.
I'm Ernest Park. I'm a CSE major, and I'm also the one streaming this talk to YouTube.
You heard that?
Part of it.
And that was Ernest Park, Ernie. He's computer science engineer, and he's streaming the talk for us in YouTube.
Ah, okay, cool. Thanks.
Okay, if you want to speak loud.
Okay. I'm Hannah Stinson, and I'm a biology major.
Biology major.
Brianna Osborne, I'm pre-vet animal biosciences.
You heard that, Bree, and she's vet medicine, or pre-vet, right?
Pre-vet.
Pre-vet animal bioscience major.
Animal bioscience major.
Yeah, cool.
I'm Christina. I'm biochem right now. I'm switching to zoology soon, and I'm also pre-vet.
Christina, she is not part of my students. She is bioscience scholar, so she made the exception of coming here to hear about the talk. And she is chemistry major. biochem, but she's switching to zoology, and she's a pre-vet, right? Or will be pre-vet.
I'm Drew. I'm a computer science and engineering major.
Drew, computer science engineering.
I'm Christian. I'm an MSc major, material science.
Okay, Christian, he's material science, and I went to watch a high school football game. It turns out that his brother was playing in that high school. And so I got to meet his family, so that was pretty cool. Okay, okay. Before we go on into you talking about your career,
Yeah.
can you tell us about what animals you work with at the zoo right now?
Yeah, so, part of what attracted me to this particular zoo is just we have a really big collection. So 1,500 animals, plus or minus 9,000 fish, is pretty big these days for a zoo. So that's, I think San Diego is about that size. Most zoos are about 500 to less than 1,000 animals. And so our collection is very diverse. So we have everything from reticulated giraffe to white rhino, black rhino, Asian elephants. We have hippopotamus. We have, of the great apes, we have almost all of them. We have orangutan, we have chimpanzees, and we have gorillas. We have some other smaller primates as well. And then we have my particular interest, which is kangaroos. We have about 50 kangaroos and wallabies. And then we have quite a few sloths and an armadillo. We used to have giant anteaters.
What is it, 2 toes or 3 toes sloths?
Only 2 toes. Yeah, but we have Hoffman and Linnaeus, so at least I have some variety there. I think we have 7 sloths right now. We have a baby sloth still. She's like 5 months old, so she's pretty. So we have breeding sloths. And I have a thing for sloths.
And 3-toed sloths, you guys are not dealing with 3-toed sloths because they are hard to maintain in captivity, I'm guessing?
Correct. We can't grow enough cyclopeans.
Keep going, I'm just getting my chart
okay. And then we have a lot of reptiles, and that's cool because I really do enjoy working with reptiles. We have a lot of crocodilians and snakes, as well as frogs. And we're involved in conservation projects in a lot of different parts of the world. Across the different species. We have a lot of carnivores as well, hyenas, spotted hyenas, cheetahs, lions, tigers. So you name it, more or less, if it's a big charismatic animal, we definitely have it. Plus we have a lot of interesting species that you don't see elsewhere. So that was really what was interesting to me. What I worked on today, so our day usually starts at about 6:30 in the morning, and we start early because it gets hot in Florida. And if you're doing procedures outside, even in the winter, it can get so hot by midday that you don't want your patients like dying of heat stroke when they're under anesthesia. So we typically work pretty early to get everything done. Most of our procedures are done by 1 or 2, but we have enough animals that it keeps us busy. So today I actually worked on a Western bush baby. I saw a couple of greater bush babies. I had an American flamingo, an orangutan, actually 2 orangutans today. What else? Oh, a sloth. Yeah, I think that was it. Part of my day was taken up by meetings today. But every day is a variety, and usually you'll start out with your day with a schedule, but it's hard to follow it because so many things get added in for emergencies and people come in to ask you questions. So I love the job because it's continuously challenging me. And I don't like to sit at my desk, so this is good.
Okay. So even though I'm really casual with Dr. Keller, she's a big deal. She has you got a BS, right, in science?
I'm actually a BA in biology.
Am I mistaken? Did you get your master's or you went to your PhD right away?
No, I'm doing a master's right now, but I did a PhD right away.
She did a PhD, and then she got her PhD degree.
Mm-hmm.
Now a master's? Okay.
Yeah, I just started a master's program this semester. Okay. I don't know why.
So whenever you started your BA, you knew that you wanted to be a vet?
Nope. I am one of those rare veterinarians that can tell you for real, I did not know I wanted to be a veterinarian when I was 5 years old. When I was 5 years old, I wanted to be a biologist. I actually wanted to be a zoologist if I wanted to be anything. And I knew it was going to be something to do with animals, but because we traveled so much and my parents are not animal people, I had almost 0 pets growing up. I didn't even know veterinary medicine was a career until probably grad school. No joke. Really slow bloomer.
So if you didn't want to go into vet school, you majored in zoology? Is that what you did?
So my degree was actually biology with a major in zoology. Sorry, a minor in zoology. My undergraduate thesis was on the behavior of zoo animals, tree kangaroos in particular. So I started working in the zoo field pretty early on, but I didn't know that I could be a zoo vet. I mean, I met zoo vets, it just never occurred to me that I could be a recruiter. So I really wanted to be a zoologist or a biologist.
Okay, so during your undergraduate, any tips that you do undergraduate research? What were your classes that you took? Were you an A student, or did you happen to have your B and C, perhaps a D? If you don't want to say the D's, then that's okay.
Well, the first thing you learn when you go to vet school is everybody tells you C equals DVM. And what they mean is don't kill yourself, the classes are pretty hard. But as an undergrad, I actually went to a small school that doesn't have grades. So I can't even tell you if I was an A student, a B student, or a C student. All I can tell you is that I was satisfactory in all my classes. It was an honors college here in Florida, and actually the requirement for you to graduate, every single student had to do independent research and write a thesis. So, yep, we did research from day one in school. My research was in behavior in tree kangaroos at a zoo in Australia. But there were people doing, arts thesis and ballet or whatever, you name it. But research has been part of my life since I was 21. So yeah, I really, really think research is important because it helps you know how to formulate hypotheses, and whether that be something that you need to do for clinical medicine or actual research where you need to collect clinical data or other data. That skill, the sooner you learn it, the better. And I think the trend these days is, at least from what I've seen from a lot of pre-vet students, is a lot of these people are coming in with research under their belt, if not publications. It's becoming incredibly competitive,
Okay, so after that you went to graduate school at Texas A&M, I'm guessing?
Yeah, yep. I went to Texas A&M to do a PhD in conservation biology, actually reproductive physiology. I wanted something that was hands-on. And so for 6 years, I spent time in a research lab making embryos. And the goal was to make embryos of endangered species.
We talked about embryos today in class, and yesterday, but human embryos.
Yeah.
Okay, so you did that for 6 years, and then all of a sudden you said, I'm going to go into vet school?
So the grad school I was at at Texas A&M, and Texas A&M has, I'm not going to lie, has one of the best vet schools in the U.S., okay? I'm not biased or anything, no. It has a really good vet school, and the grad school was in the vet school, and I could see all these students who were, about my age, maybe a little bit younger, going around doing stuff with animals. All I got to work with was parts of animals. And I'm thinking, all I really want to do is be hands-on. Like I'm a very practical kind of hands-on person, and I really just wanted to do that. And I could see them going out in the fields and working with the cattle, or carrying dogs around. I thought, who are those people? And so finally, one of the other grad students said, well, those are vet students. The reason we're here is because there's a vet school. Oh, right. And so in the back of my mind was, I wonder if I should go back to school. This is before I even finished my PhD. And I really should have done it the reverse. Most people go to vet school first and then do a PhD, because that makes more sense financially, but hey, I never want to do things that make sense. So just bear that in mind if you're planning on doing that. So I graduated with my PhD, couldn't find a job, and decided, well, this was the one time I was going to try for vet school. Because I was already older. I was in my 30s, so I didn't want to wait too long. Because I know it can take a while to get into vet school. I said, you know what, I'm going to give it one try. So I applied. I applied to a bunch of schools, and a lot of them told me I was too old. They said they weren't interested in alternative students. And I said, that's fine, I'm not interested in you. But I got offered places at, Ivy League schools and Texas A&M, and so I started school.
So I believe you're talking about Cornell,
yep.
Penn.
Cornell, Davis, Penn. So I got into Penn. And they all have their merits. They all have different strengths and weaknesses. Each school is a little bit different. It depends on what you want to do. But basically, if you get into vet school, you just go. You don't really care where you go. You just go because it's not hard to get in. And so I was kind of a little surprised that I got in, but off I went.
And you got in into what university?
Oh, Texas A&M.
Okay.
Yep.
So in state tuition.
Yeah, because they gave me, in state tuition, they gave me a scholarship. I wasn't in state, but if you can get in state, you should get in state because it's expensive to go to vet school. And the last thing you want to do is have to pay loans even more than you're going to pay anyway. So, and interestingly, I didn't, like when we all sat down the first day of school, it was our vet class, and they asked us to raise our hands. How many of you are interested in small animal medicine, so dogs and cats? How many of you are interested in large animal medicine, cattle, horses? You can lump pigs in there if you want. How many of you are interested in exotic animals, like zoo? And how many of you are interested in research? So the research component was probably 3 people. Because there are some people who go to vet school knowing they're going to go into laboratory animal medicine. And then there are some of us who go in knowing we want to do dog and cat medicine. I didn't know. I really, really didn't want to practice dog and cat medicine. I worked in a vet clinic to make sure that I wanted to go to vet school, and I did. I didn't want to do that. So I raised my hand with the exotics. Well, I will tell you what, 3/4 of the class raised their hand saying they were interested in doing exotic animal medicine. And guess how many of us now that have graduated out of the class of 100 are actually working in exotics? I think 2. So, yeah. But the majority are still working as vets.
So we have 3 vets here, 3 vets, right? 1, 2, 3. What do you guys want to do?
I was probably going to do companion with something else.
Companion with something else?
I like large animal and exotics.
You said what?
Large animal and probably exotics.
Large animal and exotics? Okay. And for those that are not pre-vet or anything like that, what animals do you like the best? Exotics, that's sloths, wild. Exotics. Christian. Exotics. Companions, so like cats and dogs.
Yeah. I'd say equines.
Okay.
Who is not afraid of getting hit?
There's a question coming up.
For someone looking to apply to vet school, do you recommend, like, when you go to applying also to like graduate programs in case you don't get in, and then applying again afterwards?
Absolutely. I tell every single undergrad student and pre-vet that I get a chance to meet up with, have a backup plan. Whether that be grad school, a job, I don't know, pick your poison, but make it a like a backup plan that you enjoy, because what if that's what you get? So you better enjoy it. So not just have one, but have one that you know you can live with, because it is totally okay not to get into vet school the first time. That is almost par for the course now. The vet schools are getting so many applicants, and even though the number of vet schools is increasing, every few years, we're at 31 or 32 in the U.S., and there's the vet schools in the Caribbean, and there's vet schools in Australia and in the UK now that you can go to if you're willing to pay, that are AVMA accredited. It's still hard, and that's not a reflection on those students. It's a numbers game. And every year, the vet universities, the vet schools kind of reset the criteria they're looking for each class. And it's a process now. They have major committees. Each application that they actually accept to look at, is reviewed by multiple people. And they decide ahead of time, we want the vet population to look like this year. We need more people in large animal medicine. Here are the people who are interested in that. So, you never really know what exactly they're looking for. They might be looking for some older students next to some younger students. They might be looking for, who knows what else. So it just varies, and each school will be a little bit different. I just know that they have it down to a science how they get people in now.
Do you think they
so I would always go back.
Do you think they prefer people with like more hands-on experience or more like research? Is there really they just prefer the mix, or?
Yeah, well, some vet schools are requiring that you have an actual set number of hours that you've done practical experience for. For example, the University of Florida in Gainesville, I was recently told by a prospective student there, they want 1,000 hours of hands-on experience. And that means not just shadowing. Like if you came to watch me work for a day, that doesn't count. They want you in the shelters, they want you in the clinic. 1,000 hours on top of all the pre-vet classes they want you to have. So I still think most schools want a certain number of hours in the clinic because it proves that you're dedicated to the field and you already know what you're getting into. I think research is becoming much more common because a lot of the vet schools now, what they're trying to do, the ultimate goal is to replace their professors eventually. And for that, you need a population of people that is research oriented. I also think a lot of people think doing research and publishing pads out their CV in a way that will help them get in. I think it's pretty universal that almost every student that gets in has done some level of research or has a ton of experience. It was either a vet tech or worked with somebody in a lab. So that's my take on it. I may not be the best to ask.
I met with the assistant dean of admissions here at Ohio State through bioscience scholars. I don't know if you were there. Health scholars and STEM scholars. And one thing that she told us is like, okay, you do need your animal experience working with a vet. That they do look for a student that is well-rounded, so if you're doing research, that helps. But not only that, they want someone that does community service or service outreach. They don't want someone that can't talk to humans. They don't want someone that doesn't care about their community and wants to improve it. So those that are in STEM scholars, if you're doing service outreach, which all of you guys should be doing, you are going to be able to put that in your application. And she told us that, right? Am I right? She said that's one thing that we want to see in every single application. And I think it reflects. Look at Dominique. She's not getting paid for this, are you?
No.
And she's
I just like
talking to
doing
students. Okay. So I don't want to bore those students that are not part of pre-vet. Why don't we go on, okay, so you got your PhD. Why did you decide to get a PhD? What was your thinking about that?
So I started out, the undergraduate degree was on an endangered species. The tree kangaroos are pretty critically endangered. There's not one species that isn't critically endangered. And I picked that topic sort of because I really wanted to do conservation work. But I didn't know enough about it to know what the different areas were that you could go into. And I mean, conservation work can be field research, it can be in situ work, it can be education, it can be clinical work. So at the time I was doing kind of zoo-based work. I think real conservation work takes place out in the field, and that's it's really hard. It's challenging and time-consuming, and you get rained on and working in the mud. I didn't do that, but I wanted to at least work on improving the life of the animals in zoos. So that was kind of my goal. When I started doing the PhD, what I was really looking for was something even more practical. And my thought was, well, we don't have a lot of the endangered species. It doesn't make sense to try to make more of them. And so that was my sort of naive beginning in the world of reproductive physiology of endangered species. So my topic was specifically to take single sperm from an endangered species, male, and take a single egg from an endangered species, female, the same species obviously, and then introduce them to each other in a process that's called ICSI, intracytoplasmic sperm injection. It's basically high-tech IVF, so in vitro fertilization. And in vitro fertilization, maybe you guys have talked about this, basically you're adding sperm to eggs in a petri dish, in an incubator, and allowing fertilization to take place on its own. The techniques we were trying to master, we're trying to help those species that were having a lot of problems even getting any kind of fertilization to happen. So we're making embryos. That is probably the ultimate hands-on conservation approach. And the truth of the matter is, when you get down to that level of the need for a species, that species is in dire trouble. So what I don't think I appreciated at the time was, because I was so focused on my research trying to make more embryos, was where are those embryos going to go? Right? You can make a lot of embryos. You might even be able to freeze them and store them for later. But if you have nowhere to put them, that is to say more recipients for females, then you just have embryos in the freezer. So in particular, that was something I didn't address as part of my thesis because we were just focusing on making them. But as I became a veterinarian and started getting involved with other conservation projects, what happened is my eyes were kind of open to conservation in the field, big picture. So in Wisconsin, we worked with the Crane Foundation. And the Crane Foundation is the group responsible for trying to bring back the whooping cranes. The whooping cranes migrate from Canada to Florida, Florida to Canada, and those are the big.
Really successful. Which they
really successful. Well, we spent millions of dollars on crane conservation, and there is still no good population of migrating cranes that have come from the conservation project. I mean, they tried everything. They tried guiding those birds with ultralights. I mean, this is, you may have seen, or if you haven't, you should Google it. This is the group that tried to get young cranes that were hand raised by puppets, people wearing masks and costumes, so they wouldn't get habituated to people to follow ultralights. So they would fly them down to Florida. The birds would be flying behind the ultralights, and to do that is like weeks. It takes weeks to get down from Wisconsin to Florida. So I don't think I can say that the project has not been unsuccessful. We've certainly been able to raise a lot of cranes, and we've learned a lot along the way. One of the papers I wrote for that project was looking at all the pitfalls that you can get across when you hand-raise babies to try to release them in the wild. And that's another conversation we can have another day. I think what you realize when you get into the field is that it's great to do the conservation, but if you have nowhere to release these animals to, in other words, if the habitat isn't good enough for them, or if there isn't enough of it, or if there's still in danger from humans in the wild, then your efforts are going to be really mitigated. So, but I wanted to do conservation projects. That's what my PhD was all about, was to try to make endangered species. And there is a whole field, it's a pretty small field for reproduction of endangered species. So if anybody's interested in that, I can certainly put you in touch with people who do that. There are several zoos like San Diego and Cincinnati and Audubon and New Orleans that work on that, and that's all they do.
Okay, so I have some students that I think that they're really bright, and they're going to a really good university, I think. It's okay, not better than Wisconsin. No, it's okay.
Be careful now.
And they're really smart kids. They get the grades, most of them. They're involved in projects. Same thing with you. You got your BA, you got a PhD, and you got a vet degree. Right away, obviously, you are really qualified. Did you got a job, or did you happen to do something else? And whenever you have to apply for a job, did everyone want to hire you?
No, if only it were that easy. You know, I got straight A's in grad school at a 4.0. I got 3.89 in vet school. You know, I settled. I was a straight A student in vet school. I got no C's, but I got 2 B's. Anatomy still haunts me. And yet, you know, you can be as qualified as you want, and there are still times you're not going to get the job. So when I first graduated from vet school, I was lucky enough to get an internship. So I did actually get the first job I applied for. Internships are a little bit different. When you graduate from vet school, you can either go straight into a vet clinic and just work as a veterinarian, or you can opt for lower pay, longer hours, with the glory, and learn more in an internship, which is basically sort of slave labor, if you will. But it's also an intense learning experience, and so that's why you do it. And medical students do that a lot. I don't know if they call them internships or they call them fellowships. The idea is the same. It's just to start your advanced training. So I did that. And then I was also lucky enough to get the first residency program I applied to, which was at Wisconsin. So the residency programs are additional training. They're also extremely hard to get into because there's so few of them. And that's when you start to specialize. So in order to be able to call yourself a specialist, so I'm a boarded zoo specialist, and I have letters behind my name that indicate that I passed the exams that make me a specialist. I can't call myself a specialist if I haven't passed the exams. And so you do 3 additional years of work where you're specializing. So you could go into dermatology, you could go into surgery, you could go into ophthalmology. I chose to go into zoo medicine. That's my specialty. But then when I finished my residency, I stayed on at Wisconsin as an instructor. And actually I'm still an instructor there. But did I get the first jobs I applied for? Heck no. In fact, the first job I applied for was at this tiny zoo in Texas, where I graduated from school. And I got interviews, and it went great. And I thought, wow, this is going to be good. I think I got this job. And I did it. And I was like, this tiny little zoo doesn't want me. Okay, no big deal. And then I tried at some bigger zoos, and I didn't get those either. And then I started getting some applications that I actually got job offers for. So I got a job offer in a place in Texas as well, a bigger zoo. But they didn't want to pay me. And I couldn't pay off my student loans. It wasn't enough to make a living. And the reason they were doing that was because I had just finished residency and they were putting me on probation. So I said, I'll just keep trying. So I took other jobs. I did consulting work. I continued to teach a little bit. And I kept trying. So I think I applied in total for about 12 jobs, and I got offers to 3 or 4 of them. And then I think I got a couple other job offers for something unrelated to development in the area I wanted. And then I got this job offer, and then I did an interview on the phone. I did that interview in my car, I think. I was visiting friends someplace, and I did it in my car, and it was so weird. But then they offered me an in-person interview, and so we did that. And that was scary, you know. I mean, it was my first really big. This place is a big zoo, and so I think they must have thought we were a good fit, and we are a good fit. Like the team I work with is really good. And so what it comes down to is you can have straight A's, you can be cum laude, you can have everything perfect on paper. A lot of it's who you know, so that means get good references. Get references that apply to the area you're going into. And also how you come off in the interview. And that really kind of ties back into what you said. Are you the kind of person who can talk to other people? Because that's really what a lot of veterinary medicine is about. And really that's what a lot of jobs are about. Are you able to relate what you're doing to your patient, your client, your, whatever client it is, doesn't matter what area you're in. Are you an engineer? Are you a computer scientist? Can you tell people what it is you're trying to do for them and how it's going to work out? I think that's what people want to know. Can you work with a team? That's huge.
Right. Okay. So you have all this education. You wanted to do conservation, and then you wanted to do vet school. In your position, can you type all those interests on what you're doing?
Yeah, more or less. But I'm really lucky. I have a boss who really understands that for what we do, in particular the field of zoo medicine is intimately tied to conservation because so many of the animals we work with are endangered. That if you don't go out into the field and see what it's like for the field researchers or the animals in the location they come from, then you're missing the point. A large part of what we do is outreach. So this is outreach. When I talk to guests, and I talk to guests every single day when I do procedures, and I tell them because we're behind glass, I have to go on the microphone every single day and explain to them, this is such and such animal, this is what we're doing, they come from here, this animal had this on the exam, this is the plan. So I need to be able to tell them what it's like, if I can, what it's like for them in the field, what it's like to be that animal. When they're endangered, it's important to be able to say you understand why they're endangered. So it does tie in really, really well. I happen to be pretty lucky, but all the zoo vets have that option now. There's a lot of education that takes place in our day-to-day business anyway.
Okay, now I'm going to talk about, there's questions.
You said that you had struggled to pay for the student loans. Do you find financially, do you make enough financially to pay for your loans, live a good comfortable life? That was a concern that I know that zoo vets make less than a clinical kind of in the working with dogs vets do.
Well, that is a brave kid. Yes, you touched on it. Most vets now, I think when you graduate, I want to say it's high 60s is your starting salary, and that's probably without any bonuses or anything like that. And it could be a little bit higher. And obviously it depends on where you're working. The first job I had to turn down was because they couldn't, I know they could have paid me more. They didn't want to pay me more. And I would not have been able to live in that particular city with the student loans that I have. Now, yes, I make enough to pay, not a huge mortgage, but enough for a 2-bedroom house. My car is paid off for 6 years. And I don't drive a fancy car, it's not new. I don't have cable, I don't eat out a lot, but I do make enough to pay off my loans every month. And I should be able to pay them off. I'm willing. So, but the truth is a lot of zoo vets don't make what this zoo pays us. And so there are quite a few instances in the smaller zoos where you are the only vet, meaning you're on call 24 hours a day, every day of the year, but you have a smaller collection to deal with, where you don't get paid as much as a dog and cat veterinarian because you're not paid on commission, you're paid a salary. You might get paid to go to one conference a year. If you're lucky, you have a relief veterinarian who can take over so you can have some vacation. But it can be very, very hard. And a lot of veterinarians who are at the level that I'm at actually came up that way. They would have worked in really small zoos that had 300 animals. been the solo vet, struggled to pay their bills, maybe had to put their loans in deferment. And then finally, as they got more experience, were taken into bigger zoos where the pay scale is a little bit higher. Yeah, I also happen to live in a city where the cost of living isn't too bad. Tampa's not exorbitant, it's not California. But those are all really good questions. And, people will say, oh, we'll just get into med school, don't worry too much about that. I think you're right to think about it, because you do need to know what you're willing to do with your life. It's all part of the bigger picture. So, yeah, really.
Another one that kind of ties into that. Do you for somebody, do you think you could have, a family on what you make? You know what I mean? Do you think it's, possible to have a family once you're there? It's, good enough to take care of a family that way?
You take care of chickens.
Well, I take care of chickens, but man, can they take care of me when I get old? No. Yeah.
Really quick, she has chickens as her pets.
Oh.
That's why I'm saying that.
Yeah, he understands me. He knows me too well, I think. Yeah, I think I could. I mean, I'm single right now, but even with my income, if I had a child, I think we would be fine. I know how much childcare costs, so it would be borderline. We could make do, yes. Most of the other vets that I know, everybody else that I work with is dual income, and they definitely have families and kids, and they seem to be fine. Nobody that I know drives anything more fancy than a Prius, so there's that. If that tells you a little bit. Typically, vets don't drive very fancy cars if they're in the zoo field. Now, dog and cat clinic owners drive, fancier cars. Yes, I think you could, but that does bring me to the point of the life-work balance, which you have to talk about. Because it's so hard to get into med school, you're stressed out. We're all type A, and as part of having your backup to getting into not getting into med school, make sure you have a backup plan for your social life too. Don't put that off. Don't put off having a family. Don't put off doing whatever it is that you need to do for yourself, taking care of parents, taking care of siblings, taking care of yourselves. I can't emphasize that enough. I think when I went to med school, I was so focused on med school that my family suffered a little bit. The person, my partner at the time, I hardly ever saw him, and actually our relationship broke up as a result of med school. And there's a lot of divorce that happens in med school because it is so stressful on one or both of the partners. But boy, I sound all negative. I don't mean it to be. It's a fantastic career. I love it. I would not do anything different. I feel like I'm blessed to go to work every single day. It's amazing. It makes me cry and it makes me smile on the same day.
So we have a couple of minutes, and I can open it to students. But before we open it to students, can you tell me some of the places that you get to visit? I'm guessing for free because of your job.
Well, okay, so actually, I'm going to Panama tomorrow. So we're going to go, because it's International Sloth Day this weekend, so the 20th or the 21st, I think. So we're going to go celebrate Sloth Day. This will be the third or fourth time we've done it.
I should have brought my sloth t-shirt.
I should have worn my sloth t-shirt. So we're going to go to Panama, and actually I'm paying for this trip, in part myself. And the reason for that is it works allowing me the days off, but not paying for a job. So Zoom typically pays for at least one field trip a year, and I've kind of had that paid for. So this last year we went to Cayman to work with the stingrays there. The year before that, I was in Panama earlier this year as well. And again, I paid for that one. Then we went to Panama a couple times last year as well. Again, we're working with sloths and other rescue animals there. I was in Cancun, Mexico, working with mako sharks before that. And then I've gotten to go to a couple of international conferences. I was in Berlin this summer at a conference presenting, but I mostly paid for that as well. But usually you'll get one paid trip to go to a conference, and usually you'll get paid field research too, because most do support that, and know they should.
Questions for her?
I go to ask them.
I was going to ask, are there internships available for undergrads at Busch Gardens?
Do you want to come and say it to her? That way she knows who you are?
Yeah, I don't have anybody to support it. I already know how bad one is.
Hi, I'm a student.
Yeah, I love those students.
If there's internships available at Busch Gardens for undergrads or
No, actually, the externships that we have are for clinical year activities. So depending on what school you go to, it's either third year or fourth year. But there are externships available, and they're anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks. And you can do them at any of the parks of your choosing. So that means that every year there's multiple places available for people. So if you're more interested in marine mammals, you would go to one of the SeaWorld parks. And if you're more interested in terrestrial animals, you would come see us. So yeah, it should be a link on the SeaWorld website, but you have to wait till you're in your clinical year. Yeah, of course.
Oh, I thought you had a question.
Oh no.
Oh, you don't? Okay. Anyone who had a question? I saw a couple of hands. Alex. Alex is running. She's walking.
So my question is, how did you get involved with your TV show? Did you reach out to companies in order to do that, or was it your work, or what sort of?
Yeah, it was all set up by work before I started. They already started filming before I got there. I think the way it worked was the production company based in LA. It's a company called Nat9. What they do is they come up with crazy ideas for shows, and then they pitch them. And so they pitched it to SeaWorld, and I think SeaWorld was initially extremely skeptical because my understanding is that I could be wrong on this, but they wanted to do like a reality TV show. You know what that means? I mean, that's kind of raunchy and like racy, and there's zero way that a family-oriented park like Busch Gardens was going to allow that. So what they ended up getting was, more of a kids show, and I think it's been well received. I think the spectrum of people who like it is like kids and their grandparents. So that's who our audience is. But it was pitched by the company, so it wasn't something that grew up out of our park. Somebody came to us externally, pitched it to our corporate headquarters, and then came down to our park and said, hey, what do you think about this? And then I think what happened was the producers came to visit, did a site visit, talked about the feasibility, and then they just started doing it. There's no script to the TV show. There's nothing. Like, they come in and they just follow us around. The format's pretty easygoing. They film what they can. Like, they don't tell us what to do. Like, we don't schedule things because of what they tell. Like, they don't say, hey, let's do a hyena this week. It's more like, oh, you're doing a hyena, can we film it? And that's what happens. And then they'll kind of interview us afterwards. So they wanted more drama, but we're not very dramatic. So, I don't know, does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Are you just interested in like how the process works or how it's going to go? Yeah, I think Bronx Zoo actually has a new reality zoo TV show that's supposed to be on cable, I think, so of course I don't get to see it. But I hear it's pretty racy. In other words, animals do die there, whereas in our place, bad things don't happen. Well, we know that's not how life works. Cool. Oh, yeah.
All right. Well, first of all, Dominique, thank you so much for accepting and talking to us, interrupting your day. To my speakers, I often give them a mug or a laser pointer. And I'll be sending yours for this talk that you give. So you get a mug that says sustainability scholars. Another thing, if my students want to, or my students and bioscience scholars want to contact you regarding any questions that they might have and they didn't get the chance to ask you, can I provide them with your email for those kind of things? All right.
Yeah.
With that being said,
just let them know how they got it, and that way I remember who they are.
Okay, sounds good. Well, thank you so much, Dominique, and we appreciate it. If you guys can help me with a round of applause, that would be great. Thanks so much. And I'll be talking to you soon. Thanks so much, Dominique.
I'm going to picture the group. Okay.
Okay, I will. Bye.
Okay, bye.
Right.